The race for the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate appears to be getting tighter. Attorney General Ken Paxton started the summer with a double-digit lead in several polls over Senator John Cornyn. Now we're seeing a shift. A poll released last week shows Cornyn closing the gap. It comes from Texas Southern University's Barbara Jordan Public Policy Research and Survey Center. They polled 1,500 likely Texas Republican primary voters. 44% said they intended to vote for Ken Paxton in the March primary. That's 5 points ahead of Cornyn. The Texas Southern poll came a few days after an Emerson College poll showed Cornyn and Paxton in a dead heat. For perspective, previous polls showed Paxton with a double-digit lead over Cornyn. Earlier, I spoke with Julia Manchester, national politics reporter for The Hill, about the impact of the tighter polling between Cornyn and Paxton and how a third Republican could shake up the race.
You know, I'm hesitant to say this is neck and neck because the majority of polls still have Paxton up ahead of Cornyn. However, Cornyn's allies are, very much telling us that this is the recent polling that we've seen showing him narrowing the gap, or in some cases leading within that margin of error very narrowly, shows that they are closing the gap. We know that Cornyn and his allies have poured millions of dollars into this race. He, of course, has the Senate Leadership Fund at his back. That's essentially the campaign arm of the Senate Republicans. He has the support of Senate Majority Leader John Thune, the Senate campaign arm chairman Tim Scott. President Trump has not yet endorsed in this race. That's no surprise there. We know that he is friends with Ken Paxton. He obviously considers John Cornyn an ally. But right now, I think what you're seeing with Cornyn's allies is they want to try to come up with as many polls as possible to show to President Trump that Cornyn is closing the gap and that he, is essentially deserves President Trump's endorsement in this race. They think President Trump's endorsement would basically close that gap. We'll see. Some polling suggests that President Trump's endorsement doesn't have that big of an impact, but we'll see what other polling comes out in the future.
A lot of Texans have seen TV ads for Congressman Wesley Hunt. Those ads are airing statewide. He's not in the race now, but how much support is there for him to launch a campaign?
I think there is, some curiosity in Wesley Hunt. We've seen him in a number of polls getting anywhere from, 13 to 20% support. However, it's not enough, to take on Paxton or even John Cornyn. I think for a while, Wesley Hunt, and he still is, potentially looking at this angle, positioning himself as a candidate who can walk that line between the MAGA base and the more establishment Republican base. Someone who maybe is more electable, or he would argue he could be more electable than a John Cornyn, a new, fresh, young Republican face, not as much baggage as Ken Paxton, for example, on the other side of it. So he's, I think, been positioning himself, to fill in the lane that maybe Cornyn had previously filled. And we know that he's had some conversations with the White House, but he still hasn't gotten that Trump endorsement yet. Trump very much being hands-off on this race for now.
Whoever wins the Republican nomination will likely be favored in next year's general election. It has been more than 30 years since a Democrat won a statewide election in Texas, but one high-profile Democrat is hoping to end the streak. Former Congressman Colin Allred challenged Senator Ted Cruz in last year's election and lost. Allred spoke with Capitol correspondent Dylan McKim about why he believes this time will be different.
I want to get right into this, okay? So back in 2024, you made a bid for a statewide position. You ran for U.S. Senate against Ted Cruz. You lost that election in November by almost 1 million votes. So we're not even a year past that yet, and you're running back in for another statewide position, again for the U.S. Senate. The question really is, why are you jumping back in so quick for another statewide position bid?
Yeah, well, listen, I spent 6 or 7 months with my family, going to Home Depot, the airport, gas stations, having so many people coming up to me, telling me how concerned they were about what's happening in our state and in our country. Listen, I'm proud that in the last election, we outran the top of our ticket by over 5 points, but it wasn't enough. And as an athlete, I think you spend time thinking, well, what could you do differently? And I thought if I was going to do this again, that I'd want to do it to where we speak directly to working people who grew up the way I did. I was raised by a single mom in Dallas, was a public school teacher. We struggled growing up. I think in the last election, a lot of working people were made some promises about lowering their costs, being on their side. Those promises have been broken. In fact, their costs are going up. This is going to be a very expensive Christmas and holiday season for folks because of the tariffs and because of this bill that they just passed. And what we need is somebody who's going to be on our side and actually has ideas to unrig what I think is a rigged system and a rigged economy.
I saw an internal memo from your campaign. You traveled to Kerrville to talk to voters, correct?
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Well, yeah, we were there to volunteer.
Volunteer?
Yeah,
Did you have a chance to talk to
yeah,
any
of
voters
course,
there?
yeah.
When I was down there after the floods, I remember seeing a flag draped over a business that said, "This is MAGA country," saying we're a big Trump country down there.
Yeah.
That's a big challenge for not just you, but any Democrat that wants to run in the state, is trying to get some of those rural Texans to flip over to Democratic vote. What's the messaging you can provide to those types of Texans in the rural areas that will get them to take you seriously and say, yes, I want to see Colin Allred in the U.S. Senate?
I'm so glad you asked that because listen, I feel like folks like John Cornyn, Ken Paxton, that they have failed rural Texas. This bill they just passed is going to likely lead, by some estimates, to 15 rural hospitals closing across our state. If you want to live in an area where you are hundreds of miles from a hospital, then vote for these guys, right? Because that's exactly what these policies are going to lead to. They voted against investing in our infrastructure in our rural communities. They've not helped us update the farm bill to make sure that we can bring in a new generation of farmers and keep farmers who want to stay there on their land. These tariffs are going to hit our farmers as well. So there's so much, I think. But also, when you talk about education, most of the small towns that I love to go to around our state, in many cases, the high school will be the center of that town. Don't try and go get some business on a Friday night, because everybody's going to be at the high school football game, right? And they're proud of their high school. And when we're taking money out of our public education system, when we're taking money out of the education system and devaluing it, that's hitting rural Texas harder than anywhere. And so, listen, I was captain of the football team at Baylor. I know who we are. I've seen the countryest boys in the world sitting right next to a kid who's never left the inner city, who understand working together that they actually have a lot in common and they become brothers. I think that we can bridge these divides. I've seen it. I know it's possible. I want to try and do it in the campaign.
While Allred leads the race for the Democratic nomination, a political outsider is trying to gain attention.
If we're going to win in Texas, I think we need to run a different type of candidate like me who can actually win.
We look at how a former astronaut is aiming to change the race for Senate.